I worked road. I checked the lock again, still engaged. Back behind the counter, I rewound the security feed, but oddly, the cameras had frozen for 5 minutes and resumed right after the bell had rung. I stared at the screen, unsure if I was being pranked or if the system was just glitching. At 2:30 a.m., the power flickered. The overhead lights dimmed for half a second before coming back. Then the cooler in the back, the one with the sodas, started making a low hum, deeper and more aggressive than usual, almost like a growl. I walked over to check it, placing a hand on the door. It was vibrating slightly. I opened it and it stopped. Silence. That's when I noticed the smell. Faint, but sharp like metal. Like blood. I scanned the aisle behind me, but there was no spill, no mess. I returned to the counter, trying to shake the unease crawling up my spine. At 3:10 a.m., I saw him. A tall man in a black hoodie and tattered jeans stood motionless at pump 2. The wind didn't seem to touch him. His hoodie hung heavy, shadowing most of his face. I didn't hear a car pull in, and the pumps hadn't activated. I hadn't seen him arrive. I watched him for a solid minute before the automatic lights above the pumps began to flicker. He didn't move, didn't look at the store, just stood there. I considered using the intercom, but something about him felt wrong. Unnatural. I checked the monitor again. This time, the cameras worked, but the image of pump 2 was black and static filled. I blinked, and he was gone. I bolted to the window. Nothing, just the wind. At 4:00 a.m., I started prepping for shift change. The register only had a handful of transactions. As I counted the draw, I had that prickly sensation on the back of my neck, like I was being watched. I looked up. A face stared at me through the narrow side window near the ice machine. Pale skin, bloodshot eyes, mouth half open, as if gasping. I shot to my feet, heart pounding, but when I dashed outside, he was gone. I circled the building with a flashlight. Nothing. No footprints in the leaves. No movement among the trees. I was starting to question my sanity. At 4:20 a.m., the interior lights dimmed again. The back room door creaked. That door hadn't opened all night. I approached slowly, every instinct screaming at me to run. When I pushed the door open, it was empty. Just shelves of overstock. but the door to the storage freezer inside was ajar. That freezer was always shut. I took a step forward, intending to close it. That's when I heard the soft scrape behind me. I spun around. He was there, inside the back room, between me and the exit. He wore the same black hoodie, but now I could see more of his face. Pale, dirty, blood smeared across his jaw. His eyes were wide, unblinking. In his right hand, he clutched something long and sharp. A hunting knife. We locked eyes. I couldn't breathe. "You shouldn't have seen me," he said, voice a gravelly whisper. I didn't think. I grabbed a crate from the freezer and hurled it at him. It slammed into his chest, giving me the second I needed to dash around him and back into the store. I hit the panic button behind the register and bolted out the front door. I didn't stop running until I was halfway down the road. I hid behind a tree and called 911. My voice shook so badly I had to repeat myself 3 times. It took the cops 6 minutes to arrive. He was gone, but inside, the place was torn to pieces, shelves overturned. Milk spilled across the floor. A trail of muddy footprints led from the back freezer to the window, the one where I'd seen his face. The knife, left sticking upright in the counter. The footage, gone, wiped. Only static remained for a 4-hour block. I never found out who he was or what he wanted. He never came back. But for weeks, I had nightmares of a pale face staring through that glass. And to this day, I won't stop at any gas station after dark. Some shadows don't need a reason. They just want to be seen. It was late February when this happened, one of those brutal Midwest winters that seemed to stretch on forever. I had 2 jobs back then, trying to save enough for a down payment on a condo. My main gig was a 9-to-5 office job, stable but just enough to cover bills. So at night, I delivered food for a few different apps. It was exhausting, sure, but consistent. And sometimes, if the tips were good, it made everything feel worth it. That Thursday night started like any other. I scarfed down a quick dinner around 6:00 p.m. Checked the weather app. Snow was expected after midnight and headed out. The roads were dry and clear for now. Orders were coming in fast, and by 10:30, I'd already made nearly $80. I should have called it a night right then. I even remember thinking, "You've done enough, go home, get warm." But I didn't. At around 11:15 p.m., I got a ping for a $21 order going just under 10 miles. The delivery address was unfamiliar, a place called Timber Ridge Trails. The name sounded like a gated community or a vacation cabin area. Curious and enticed by the tip, I accepted it. I didn't even check where it was until I was already on the road. 15 minutes later, I found myself driving past the last gas station on the outskirts of town and into heavily wooded back roads. My GPS kept insisting I was going the right way. The pavement gave way to gravel, then dirt, then a winding single-lane trail lined with skeletal trees and patches of icy snow. No streetlights, no other cars, just the crunch of tires and the occasional hoot of a distant owl. When I reached the end of the road, there was a gate, rusted iron poles, and a thick chain drooping across the path. A hand-painted wooden sign next to it read, "Timber Ridge closed for season." But the chain was unhooked and lying in the snow like someone had recently driven through. I paused, headlights reflecting off the sign and the trees beyond, thinking about turning around. Then my phone buzzed. It was the customer. The voice that answered was low, raspy, and somehow too calm, almost like he was whispering directly into my ear. "Yeah, I see you. You're right at the gate, right?" I said I was, and he chuckled. "We're camping down near the lake. Keep driving straight through. You'll see the trail. You'll know when you're close. Look for the fire." Before I could respond, he hung up. The call left me cold. Something about his tone, it wasn't unfriendly, but it wasn't normal either. Still, I told myself people camped in weird places all the time. Maybe he and his friends had permits. Maybe they liked doing things off the grid. I drove through the gate. The trail narrowed and dipped, snow now patchy along the edges, crunching beneath my tires. After maybe a quarter mile, it opened into a small clearing, an old gravel lot, with rotting picnic benches and what looked like a closed ranger station. I parked, engine running, and scanned the woods. It was deathly silent. No laughter, no chatter, no movement, just the wind brushing against the bare branches. Then I saw it. Deep in the woods, not near any trail, a faint orange flicker dancing through the trees. A fire. I grabbed the food, switched on my phone's flashlight, and stepped out. The cold hit me immediately, dry and sharp, like needles against my cheeks. The air smelled like wood smoke and damp leaves. I walked toward the flame. There was no marked path, no trampled snow leading toward it. I weaved between trees, careful not to lose sight of the flickering glow. As I got closer, the fire came into full view. It burned alone, steady but small, nestled in a pit of rocks. But what struck me hardest was that there was absolutely nothing around it. No tents, no coolers, no boots in the snow, no people. I froze a dozen feet away, clutching the food bag in one hand, flashlight in the other. I opened my mouth to call out, but before I could, I heard a snap. A twig breaking. I turned sharply and pointed the light. In the distance, just beyond where the beam faded, a shape stood between two trees. Still, too still, watching. I squinted. A man, maybe. Tall, hunched forward slightly. I couldn't make out his face, only that he wasn't moving. I felt something primal rise in my chest. Every instinct screamed at me to leave. "I'm just dropping off your food," I said aloud. My voice cracked in the silence. I set the bag down and turned back toward the lot. That's when I heard him walking. Snow and leaves crunching with slow, deliberate steps. I didn't look back. I started jogging. The woods suddenly felt endless, the trees closing in. I kept trying to retrace my way, but the trail was gone, like the forest had shifted in the minutes I was gone. My flashlight beam bounced wildly as I moved, catching glimpses of old signs, broken branches, and what might have been an old outhouse covered in ivy. Then finally, the gravel. I saw my car, still running, headlights fogged with mist. I sprinted, fumbling for my keys even though I didn't need them. I was inside, slamming the lock down before I even shut the door. But I couldn't drive, because now the chain was back up across the gate. I hadn't heard anyone go near it, hadn't seen a light or a figure. But there it was, hooked and padlocked, as if it had never been undone. Then came the knock. One single deliberate knock against the rear window of my car. I didn't turn around. I shifted into reverse, turned the wheel hard, and slammed the gas. My tires slipped, kicked up gravel, and finally found traction as I spun onto the frozen grass next to the gate. I barely cleared the ditch, my front bumper scraping the edge of a stump, but I made it back to the main road. I didn't stop, not even to call the police. I couldn't. I was too shaken, too afraid of sounding insane. Who would believe me? That I followed a campfire into the woods and got stalked by some ghostly man without ever seeing his face. The next day, I looked it up. Timber Ridge trails had been closed to the public for nearly 4 years. No overnight stays, no permits. A fire had destroyed several of the lakeside cabins after a camper reportedly went missing during a winter storm. Some said the park was haunted. Others claimed a squatter still lived in the ruins. But nothing was ever confirmed. The food order? It vanished from my delivery history. The phone number? Disconnected. To this day, I still don't know if what I saw was a person or something else pretending to be one. And every time I drive near those woods, even now, I swear I smell smoke. It was 2:0 a.m. when I pulled into the icy parking lot of the remote data facility, perched on a cliffside overlooking the Atlantic. The wind had picked up since midnight, howling like a creature just out of sight, and freezing rain tapped against my windshield like impatient fingers. A storm had been moving up the coast all evening, but we were expected to stay operational no matter what. I worked nights, always alone. Just me and the whirring hum of machines. The building was old and brutalist, a concrete block surrounded by pine forest and empty roadways. There were no neighbors, no traffic, no late-night deliveries. My only job was to monitor the systems and restart anything that went down. Most nights, nothing happened. Sometimes I wondered if this place even needed a person on site at all. Still, the pay was decent, and as much as I hated the isolation, I needed the money. That night, I trudged through sleet to the side entrance, badge scanned my way in, and was immediately hit by the familiar hum of cold air and machine life. I took off my soaked jacket and booted up the workstation. As usual, I pulled up the monitoring dashboard green lights across the board. With that, I settled into the chair, cracked open an energy drink, and queued up a horror podcast. It was ironic maybe, but horror stories made me feel less alone. 2 hours passed. The wind outside was now violent, slamming the building like waves crashing against a cliff. Occasionally, a low groan echoed through the vents pipes expanding or walls settling. I told myself. Still, the sounds felt more deliberate than random. Around 4:10 a.m., the dashboard flashed red. One of the systems in the south wing had lost its connection. That was rare. That wing wasn't used often. It stored older backup servers that barely drew any power. I frowned and paused the podcast. I grabbed my flashlight and tablet, then headed down the hallway. The lights flickered once as I passed the stairwell. I stopped, waited. They stayed on. Just the storm messing with the lines, I thought. The south wing was a long, narrow corridor with vents that made strange metallic noises on a good day. Tonight, the air seemed heavier, denser, like I was walking underwater. My boots echoed too loudly on the linoleum floors. When I reached the server room, I scanned in, opened the door, and was hit by the usual blast of recycled cold air. I walked to the end of the rows. The unit that went offline was at the very back. My flashlight flickered as I approached cheap battery. I tapped it, and it steadied. That's when I saw the cord. A heavy-duty power cable was lying on the ground completely unplugged. These weren't the kind of plugs that fell out on their own. You had to yank them. I crouched to reconnect it, but before I could, I heard it a soft creak, like a shoe on tile. I froze. "Hello?" I called. Silence. Then, from deeper in the row behind me, tap, tap, tap. I stood slowly, heart thudding like a drum in my ears. I swung the flashlight beam behind me. Nothing. I finished plugging the cable in with shaking hands, watching the system flicker back to green. I should have gone straight back to the office. Instead, something pulled me toward the far end of the room toward the sound. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was fear disguised as logic. I walked slowly, flashlight cutting through the racks of blinking machines. As I reached the final row, I heard it again, a whisper. It was so faint, I wasn't even sure it was real. I spun toward it, pressing my back to the cold metal of a server rack. Then footsteps, fast, coming closer. I ran. I don't know what made me bolt, but I did. Sprinting through the room, through the hallway, taking the stairs 2 at a time. I didn't look back. I couldn't. Back in the main office, I slammed the door shut and locked it. I leaned against it, trying to catch my breath, chest heaving. My whole body was buzzing with adrenaline. I watched the cameras. Nothing. No one. Every hallway feed was clear. The server room still. My breathing slowed. Maybe I imagined it. Maybe I was just tired, and the storm was playing tricks on my ears. Then the office lights flickered once, twice, and went out. My monitor shut off. and the door handle behind me turned. I jerked away and stared as it twitched again, like someone was testing it from the other side. "No, no, no," I whispered. I backed across the room toward the emergency exit. I grabbed my phone. It had no signal. I pressed my ear to the door's silence. Then a bang, not loud, but deliberate. Like a warning. I flung the emergency exit open and stumbled into the stairwell, nearly slipping on the wet concrete. I ran to the first floor and toward the front entrance, my footsteps loud and erratic. As I reached the lobby, I saw movement in the glass reflection. Someone was standing at the far end of the hallway. I didn't stop to confirm. I hit the door with my shoulder and burst outside into the freezing wind. Sleet struck my face like needles. My car sat 20 yards away, half covered in ice. I sprinted, breath burning in my lungs. My keys were already in my hand. I always kept them ready at night. I unlocked the door and threw myself inside, slamming it shut and hitting the lock. From the corner of my eye, I saw something shift near the entrance. A tall, dark figure stood at the glass door, unmoving. I turned the ignition. It coughed, sputtered, then started. I peeled out of the lot, tires skidding on ice, heart jackhammering in my chest. I didn't stop until I reached a gas station 20 miles away, hands still trembling on the wheel. The police swept the building later that morning. No one was found. Nothing was stolen. No signs of forced entry. But that cable in the server room? They found another one ripped out on the opposite side. Whoever had been in there had been moving around. The company reviewed security footage. It had gaps. Small, unexplainable blank spaces of static. I quit the next day. They never caught whoever or whatever was in that building with me. Sometimes I still hear the whisper, in dreams, in silence, just under the sound of static.